Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest of honor. He is the writer-director behind so many classic films, including Lone Star, Mate One, 8 Men Out, Leanna, Limbo, and the double feature you're about to see tonight. John Sayles, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Sunshine State, the first one that you're about to see. This was, I had written a short story called Treasure that was set in the redneck Riviera, the kind of armpit of Florida. And I had spent some time there when I was younger, hitchhiking around and hanging out. And I went back to see if I could scout it and see if it was still a good place to make a movie and make a movie of this short story. And when I got there, it was so changed. And it got me thinking about corporate tourism versus the kind of old-fashioned mom-and-pop tourism that had existed in that area. And about at the same time, I started reading about American Beach. And American Beach was, for a long time, the only kind of all African-American beach community in the South. It existed because a guy who was the head of the African-American insurance company, which had been formed so black people could afford to bury their own dead, and who got Eleanor Roosevelt to twist a few arms and allow this beach to be sold, this beach property to be sold to an African American. At first it was only employees of his company who lived there, and then it became a really popular kind of site. And in the 30s through about the 70s, convoys of African American people would drive down together, because if they drove alone, they were likely to get picked off by redneck sheriffs and thrown in jail or fined or whatever. And they would go and party on American Beach, and some would buy property there. So you'll see what's left of American Beach in the movie. Both this movie and the next one, I think a lot of the fun is just seeing such good actors. We had incredible casts for both of these. But this one is very close to my heart, because when we got to shoot it, we got to live on the beach with the crew. And I can't recommend that any more than as a movie experience, to be able to go back at the end of a day shooting with the actors on the other side of the island, and the crew being able to party on the beach. So I hope you enjoy it. And after the film, we'll do a Q&A with Jim and show the next movie. Thank you.
Director and editor John Sayles.
That was a strange movie.
So you mentioned in the introduction that one of the pleasures of making this movie was being near the beach, but it occurred to me watching it that there's kind of a flip side to that, which is you're making this ambitious movie with a lot of characters, a lot of scenes, a lot of locations, on location for a relatively modest budget. So what are some of the challenges of trying to pull off a movie like this when you don't have control over the weather, the sound, all those kinds of things?
You know, we only got rained out, I think, one afternoon when the weather people said that it was going to rain all afternoon, and it rained for 1 hour, but we had wrapped, and so everybody had a half a day off, and they had a really great time having a half a day off. So we got very lucky with the weather. It's a strange movie in that it's kind of like Lone Star, in which Joe Morton's character and Chris Cooper's character never meet. So Edie Falco and Angela Bassett are only on screen 10 seconds together. So there was this funny kind of thing, is there was the Edie part of the movie and then the Angela part of the movie, and they overlapped one day. And each of them kind of had their own feel to them. But quite honestly, this movie was just fun. There's so many good actors in it, and just seeing them work. That scene when you meet Ralph Waite's character, who is the father who owns the restaurant, and you start kind of right up on his eye, and you go back, and it's like a 3-page monologue in one shot. he did the first take, and I said, Ralph, I think I want to use that. Is there anything else you want to do with it? And Ralph took a whole minute. I think he was going through the stuff. At the end, he said, I can't do it any better than that. And we moved on. So, and there were so many moments like that where just actors just nailed it, and I was able to, one take, two takes, we're moving on.
Well, because you're editing it yourself, are you, with something like that Ralph Waite scene, do you shoot anything else to sort of cover yourself just in case it's not going to work?
What I do is if I'm going to do a master shot and that's it, I commit to it, and I let the actors know. And crews hate it if you're shooting a complicated, 7-minute, 8-minute, master shot, and then you do a little coverage just in case. It's just like, what are we busting our asses for? Just do a cutaway and make it easy. So when I commit to one of those, I commit to it. And just figure, Ralph Waite, terrific actor, done a lot of theater. He was on the Waltons for years. He'll nail it.
Well, watching the movie again tonight on the big screen, it just occurred to me there's so many great scenes in this where you very subtly, with the way it's framed, just simple things like that scene between Angela Bassett and her husband where she's telling him the truth, and the way it's shot where you never really see them in the same frame. Or there's other scenes in the movie where, like when Mary Steenburgen is kind of reacting to what's happening, and you don't actually see what's happening, you just kind of hold on her. And I'm curious how much of that stuff is thought out ahead of time or planned, and how much is kind of just responding to what the actors are doing on the day?
I tend to think it out beforehand, and then what I don't do, I'll tell, like, there's an early scene where Tim Hutton and Edie Falco first meet, and it's handheld and it's moving around them, and all I say to them is, you're checking each other out, and you each have a very different agenda, and you might never see each other again. So this is not like, a starstruck moment for either of you. But I will tell them, and there's going to be a camera person moving around you. We're going to shoot this 2 or 3 times, maybe more, until I've got enough where I can put this thing together, but it's going to have a sense of unease to it. It's constantly shifting, and she's kind of moving around him more than he's moving around her, and he's uncomfortable with it, and he doesn't know what she's going to come up with, and she's trying to get him off balance. So I don't try to trick actors into anything. I tell them usually kind of what the coverage is, and don't think about it. I try to give them as few matching problems. I try to minimize the number of marks on the ground. Gordon Clapp, who is in it, who plays the guy who's always trying to commit suicide unsuccessfully. He was on NYPD Blue for years and years and years, and there was a scene where we had to have one of those little tea things. It was a yellow tea thing, and it's kind of like a bean bag, and you throw it down. So in places where you can't actually put tape, because tape won't stick. And the first take, he went like on the wrong side of the car that he was supposed to be on. And I said, Gordon, what did you do? And he said, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm yellow on the show. And so I always go to yellow, and you realize that movie actors have to think about those technical things. And I try to have them think about them as little as possible. So when I need them to hit a mark, I usually try to say, okay, look for the bottle, and when you pick up the bottle, that's when you're going to turn and the dialogue will start. Well, I'm not going to put the bottle in the same place, so they really have to look at it, but I'm going to tell the cameraman, you're going to get focus on him when he goes to that bottle, and that's the mark. So yeah, I do quite a bit of thinking about it beforehand. Every once in a while, an actor's going to do something that you really like, and if it meant that they were out of focus or something, you'll do it again. So there are things that you find on the day, but most of it, especially when you're working on a low budget, you can't do too much experimenting.
Well, in terms of working on a low budget, I mean, I feel like you're such a master of getting the most. I'm always shocked when I see the budgets for your movies. Like, I was surprised when I read that this was something like $5.6 million, which, you know, for this cast and this scale, I mean, that's pretty minimal. And, you know, I'm a big fan, as I'm sure many people are here, of the movies you wrote for Roger Corman, especially Piranha. And I'm curious if those days working for him, were there lessons you picked up that still apply years later when you're making these movies?
So many of the directors I wrote for, I would get this call like a week before they were shooting, which was help, do you know how little money I have to shoot this epic you've written? And then I would do a very quick rewrite and talk with them. And so a lot of what you learned working there is what can you be done with just creative work, hard work, being prepared, and what do you have to throw money at? And so the fewer locations you have, the less it's going to cost. More day shooting rather than night shooting. Sometimes it really is, this actor has 2 lines in this scene, but because of the scheduling, we need to pay them for a whole week. Couldn't you give those 2 lines to somebody else, or find a way not to have those 2 lines, or reschedule, or whatever. So there's a huge practical part, and usually the last rewrite that I do on a script is a practical one. It's after that we've scouted things. And then there are just things that you learn, like I went down and scouted this area, and I discovered, the Spanish built a fort here for me back in the 1600s that was later used during the Civil War, and we can get it for basically putting up a sign that says, if you don't want to be an extra in this film, don't come in today. That's great, that's a wonderful location, and didn't cost us anything. We did have a moment when Edie is talking to her ex-husband, and a nuclear submarine surfaced in the water behind them, and I'm sure they weren't too happy to have it on camera, because it was kind of a secret thing.
Mentioning the idea of extras, that's another thing that's great about this movie is I feel like, the extras, everybody in it just looks so right, and there are great performances from people. The small parts that I'm assuming are probably just local hires. And, it's one thing to get great performances from Angela Bassett and Timothy Hutton, but it's another thing to direct people with a lot less experience and still have to feel like part of an integrated whole. So what's your approach in terms of casting and talking with those actors who you're kind of picking up in town?
Yeah, you go through the cast when you're thinking about how much the movie's going to cost and say, how many of these parts can be local so we don't have to fly people to Florida. And you have auditions. Very often they will be people playing something very close to what they have done in their lives. So when we shot a movie in Alaska, and I had 2 local actors who had to be working on a slime line where you cut the head and the tail off the fish and eviscerate them while you're saying your lines. I found 2 people who had worked on the slime line. So at least that part is not grossing them out, and they look like they've done it, before, and they were both really, really good. The young woman who plays the young bartender in the early scene with Edie, she worked in restaurants and bars. She was comfortable with that part of it, and she was a very good actress, as it turned out. You try to find people and not ask them to play something too far from what they've done before. And then sometimes you just go into town and say, okay, Denver's a pretty good city. I bet they have some good actors here, and we've always been, really happy about the local people that we've been able to hire.
Yeah, I've got to assume the guy with the alligator was that's his real job. He was fantastic.
Yeah, he's an alligator guy. I think he came with his own alligator. And the alligator, the thing about alligator, being the guy who wrote Alligator, is that alligators do look like they're dead or stuffed until food comes in front of them, and then they open their mouth, and then they look animatronic, which in making the movie Alligator made mixing the live alligator with the giant animatronic one a lot easier.
I want to open it up to the audience and take a few questions if anybody has any questions from the audience. Yes.
Between this City of Hope and Lone Star, I'm just wondering, why do you think you're drawn to these sprawling stories with so many characters?
Yeah, I the fiction that I write, and I was a novelist before I started making movies. I do the same thing. They're often from multiple points of view. For me, it's a way to tell the whole story, to tell a bigger story. There are subplots within this that you could make a whole movie out of, or a whole soap opera at least out of. I'm a little more interested in, for instance, you see the white community of this island and the black community, and rarely do they cross. Occasionally they do, usually more like crossing swords, but that's the whole story to me. Having somebody who's, trying to keep, just as Mary Steenburgen says, invent a tradition. So many of these tourist communities do this. One of the crazy things is, both in Tampa and some of the towns up the coast from Tampa, they have invented these kind of pirate festivals. Pirates were slave-dealing, nasty, murderous biker gangs. Why are we celebrating that they used to hang out here? That was always kind of, a question that I always asked, even growing up in Florida. I was interested in that side of it, and the side where she's somebody who loves her town, and wants it to do well, and is a sincere, really hard-working person who believes in her, lose her husband.
Do you find when you're doing these big ensemble movies with all the subplots that anything changes in editorial in terms of the order of the scenes and how you balance the different plots, or does it stay pretty close to what you've written?
It's pretty close. My first cut of a movie is usually only 5 to 10 minutes different than the final cut, so I'm usually squeezing things. Occasionally there's a whole scene. I don't think there was one in this that just goes, because I just realized I don't need that. Occasionally what will happen is there'll be a scene that's there for character development, and the actors just nail their characters and their relationships so early, you realize you don't need that. They've already done that. The audience knows that, and you don't need that scene. But no, kind of one thing that, there are kind of thematic cuts in this. The coffin shows up. There's a lot of little things that I want to plant early on, and then they show up in another place. So Mary Alice's character, you realize, oh, maybe her health isn't so good when she sees that coffin in the backyard, and then it ends up, with the kid going and he runs into Ralph Waite instead of the woman who asked him to make her a coffin for the play. Once you've done that and you've threaded those things, there is a limit to what you can take out without that glue kind of disappearing.
Other questions? Yeah.
I thought it was very beautiful, your portrayal of the African American, or I don't know what's the more equating, black people, black characters in this story. I thought it was very moving. And I wanted to know if you did any research or consulted with anybody to get that point of view.
Yeah, we had a kind of guardian angel on the movie, Maveen Betch, whose grandfather was the person who started American Beach, who owned the African American insurance company, was still living there. She was known as the Dune Lady. Maveen had kind of started to dance to her own drummer at some point in her life. And so even though she'd been an opera singer when she was younger, she'd lived in Germany, she'd done a bunch of things. Her sister was the dean of Spelman College, and Maveen had kind of gotten spiritual in a kind of great way. She was pretty much living on the beach. She'd given all her money away to save the whales, and didn't understand that she was going to have to, pay property taxes on the property that she still owned, and ended up being indigent, but was such an important part of the community that people kind of gave her this little half trailer that she lived in. Maveen stopped cutting her hair probably when she was about 35, and so she had this rug of hair that went down below her knees that she kind of folded up, and people thought she was carrying a blanket. It was actually her hair. She had decided not to cut her fingernails on one of her hands, so she had fingernails about that long, that if she didn't want to freak people out, she'd get one of those things that you put a newspaper in before you throw it on the lawn to cover them up. And she was a fount of information about the history of the community. And so she became kind of our guardian angel, and told us a lot about the history of the place and who was still living there. At one point, she wanted to see some of the filming, and she came and she watched one take of the heavy scene between Mary Alice and Angela in the backyard toward the end of the movie. And she said, "This is too much for me," and left, and later said, "I had a lot of issues with my mother." And so it was nice to have somebody who really knew the place. And she had, at one point, despite being basically homeless at that point, developers were going to take this dune that was kind of the centerpiece of American Beach and buy it and put a hotel up there. And she went to the library and spearheaded the movement to stop that development, and could have been a lawyer, everybody said. She knew every statute and this and that and the other thing, and stopped it dead. So kind of an incredible person to have be your guide into a community.
Yep, up in the center.
Okay. I just noticed that this is another film for which you wrote some music, and I'm curious where the inspiration for a song like Skeeter Pie comes from.
Yeah, we couldn't find one song that really, when we were trying to get, Florida music, there was Leonard Skinner, and that was about it. So we ended up with these 3 songs to cover the credits. And so we had 2 kind of archival songs. Irving Berlin wrote one of them, and I think that might be Dinah Shore singing, and the second one that's more of an ad. And we needed a short one. And so I figured, what kind of band would her ex-husband have had, and what would have been their big hit? And I decided it would have been, for Skeeter Meter, it would have been Skeeter Pie. So I wrote the lyrics for that, and Mason Daring, tends to take, whatever I croak at him and make it more musical.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty good song. I feel like that's the one flaw in the movie is you hear that song and you think their band probably would have done pretty well. They would have taken off.
Yeah, if he'd only been more serious about the music.
Well, I think we're going to wrap this up because we've got another movie to watch, but we're going to take a short break before Silver City. And if you didn't get a chance yet to pick up a copy of John's new novel and get him to sign it, you can do that now. And I actually will say I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic book. And if you love John's movies or the other fiction he's written, it's really one of the most entertaining things he's ever written. So that's my little plug for the book if you want to pick it up now. And then we'll watch Silver City.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, thanks.